In this video, we're going to be covering how to start your ranunculus, and February is a great time to start your ranunculus now. And we're going to be covering the soaking, pre-sprouting, which you don't necessarily need to do. We'll talk about that. Then the planting out, ongoing care, and we'll be talking about some troubleshooting issues at the end of the video. Actually, before I get into it, just to let you know, if you've got anemones, you can also follow these steps in exactly the same way for growing anemones. So step one is to soak your corms for 3 to 4 hours, but no more than that. The water must be clean. So if you're using sort of bulbs, corms that you've dug up from last year and the water sort of gets brown and cloudy, you need to clear that. Keep it clear, keep running it till it's clear. You need clean water. You need drinkable water, really. I mean, that's how fresh and good quality the water needs to be. You don't need to oxygenate it. You don't need a fish bubbler or any of that nonsense. You just need to maybe refresh it every hour or so. Give it a swirl round with some splashy new fresh water to oxygenate it every hour. And then once that's done, they're done. They don't need any more water than that. You'll see that they have plumped up from a sort of a little spindly dry corm into now a plump sort of corm. If you're soaking anemones, you might not notice the difference too well, but you know, they still benefit from this process. So the second stage is the pre-sprouting stage, and this is really an optional stage. That's something that you might need to work out for yourself, whether you even need to do this stage. If you live in a cold or dry climate, or if your garden beds aren't ready, for instance, then this is probably a stage you want to do. And when I say cold, what I mean is you still get very long permanent frosts that quite deep into the soil. You might want to pre-sprout before you plant out, mainly because if your ground is still frozen, you can't plant anything out anyway. So here's how you do it. You use a tray filled with damp but not wet compost. You place the corms close together but not touching, and then you cover them completely with more compost, or even if you want to cover them with a damp tea towel or something like that. I don't recommend like cling film or something that will create too much moisture or restrict the airflow. And then you want to put them somewhere where it's really dark. It's important that it's really dark to help the roots develop before the shoots develop. So it needs to be like a cool, dark place in a garage or an unheated room in your house that you can maintain the darkness levels, if you like. Check every few days to make sure the soil stays moist but not soggy. Sometimes, you know, depending on where you've put them, you'll notice that the surface of the soil is drying out. If you do have that happen, you need to go and mist every few days. Misting them is enough. Just make sure that you maintain the level of moisture but not wet. They mustn't be wet. In about a week or two, you'll see the roots forming. And if the shoots appear also, don't worry. That's not ideal, but it doesn't really matter if that happens. But normally what you want is, the reason for the darkness is to get those roots to come out first. Now you can hold these over like this for a number of weeks. But once the shoots start showing, you can let them grow to about 2 inches. If they will be obviously pale in the darkness, so you might want to introduce a bit more light, whether you want to move them to the greenhouse as an extra stage or put them near a window or something like that to give them a bit more light, because once the shoots grow, they are going to start to need light, obviously. But you can keep them in the pre-sprouting stage until those shoots are about 2 inches, because those 2 inches technically would be still underground anyway, so that's fine. So the next stage, of course, then is stage 3, which is planting out. So then you just need to determine if your soil is clay or heavy. Then you need to obviously mix in some compost to improve the drainage. If your soil is sandy, you need to add some sort of organic matter to help retain the moisture, because remember I said they like cool and moist conditions. And then you plant them in blocks for maximum visual impact, just like buttercups grow in the meadows in sort of en masse. You can weave them amongst your borders. I have done that in the past, but I did find that the visual effect was lost amongst other plants. Even when I planted, 4 or 5 corms together, I felt that the effect was really lost, and they work best in a block. If frost is still a concern, just move them into the greenhouse and let them green up in there and continue to grow until you're ready to put them out. When you're actually planting them out, a good rule of thumb is just 2 by 2, 2 inches down, 2 inches apart, and don't worry too much if you don't get it exactly measured right, they'll be fine. And section 4 is something you're not going to see for a while yet, but that's the continued growth and the blooming. They will obviously fill up into a nice big green block of foliage, and then you get the buds. And when I first did them, I've just got this one bud, and I thought, oh, is that going to be it? That's not what I was going for. But then as the weeks progressed, I just got multiple buds, and you just get then these blousy blooms, and it was just an absolute joy, and I was so glad that I'd done it. Ranunculus bloom around the same time as sweet peas, so they are, if you think about them, the treatment is actually very similar to sweet peas as well. They just like the cool, wet conditions, same as the sweet peas like. And then you can pick them and harvest them for cut flowers, and they will produce more buds and blooms until you get into the very height of summer. Once you get into the very hot part of summer, July onwards, late July onwards here in the UK, they're done. It's too hot for them. They blow open and then they just look a mess. And they start to yellow. So they're no good after that. But you can leave them in the ground if you want, especially if you're in a temperate climate like in the UK, because they will actually reflower the next year in situ. But it's up to you. I dig mine up, but you can leave them in the ground. I've got some in the greenhouse that have just come up on their own that I forgot to dig up last year. So you can see how they will do that. Number 5 then is troubleshooting. So if your area is too hot, you might want to consider planting them out earlier or giving them partial shade from the worst heat in the day. And if they're not sprouting, then it's likely that you didn't get the moisture levels right when you were pre-sprouting them. As I say, they need to stay damp, but of course not waterlogged. That will rot them. But so that's really just remember that they like the cooler and wetter part of the season. And then on the final note with troubleshooting is growing them in containers. I personally wouldn't recommend growing them in containers simply because they get too hot and too dry, which is the opposite of everything that they like. So when I've grown mine in containers and I see the leaves going yellow, you only get a bud here and there, and then the flower is very small by comparison to the ones that grow in the ground. It tells you that they are really struggling in containers. And the hotter and the drier your climate is, the more you should avoid containers, because the earth obviously maintains a general temperature that is much cooler than a pot, and also retains moisture better. Then I would recommend you always grow your ranunculus in the ground, unless you really want to be you have a little yard or a balcony and the only way you can grow ranunculus is in a container, then sure, go ahead, but just think about it. Don't use a black pot, for instance, that's going to absorb the heat, and make sure you water them probably daily to make sure that those corms don't dry out. And just a reminder that everything I just said here applies to growing anemones as well. If you have any questions, ask them in the comments. I'll be more than happy to answer as best as I can. And if you found this video helpful, then please don't forget to subscribe and like, share with your friends, and of course add a comment below. And I'll see you again in my next video. Thanks for watching. Bye.